Morning, everybody. I want to thank my colleagues for softening up the crowd for me. I'm going to talk a little bit today about some of the things I've observed running one of the biggest and most viewed websites on the web. What's up with that? I get press releases from all over the place every day, and a lot of the times the press releases and the reality don't match. And so I'm going to talk about that and talk about what you can do to help me get some of these things corrected, because sometimes there's a true large disconnect between what is written by the press release writers versus what the public actually sees when it's published in the final form in some of the newspapers or magazines or other blogs. There we go. So what is science by press release? This is something that's been a term that's been bandied about a lot lately, and it's becoming more prevalent because, as we've seen with increased funding, we've had increased number of studies, we've had more climate science by press release than ever before, and it seems to be on the increase. It's a term I use to describe basically that differential between what the real science says in the published paper versus what actually gets reported in the press. And more we see these press releases that are being distributed that just have some dubious claims. Some of them are just to give a little bit of a shock value, I've noted. But that's part of what news is all about. I spent 20 years in television, 10 years in radio now, and a couple of years in newspaper. And, you know, it's always been about, if it bleeds, it leads, you know. Make that lead story capture the attention of the viewer or the listener or the reader. And we're seeing some of that happening now in science, and especially in climate science, with some of the headlines that are being pushed out there. You know, some of them are just pure gloom and doom. Others are, you know, not so much. But the thing is that science, by its nature, when it's being reported to the public, tends to be generally a little bit boring. And so they feel like they have to embellish it to capture attention. And I'm sure many of you remember the famous quote from Dr. Stephen Schneider that says, we have to, you know, strike this balance between what is truth and what is capturing the attention of the public, effectively coming up with a measure of how to produce a white lie that we can get away with. And more we're seeing this. So the issue is overly exaggerated presentation of research findings. Now, I'm seeing this on a daily basis throughout science and in the climate science community. And part of it had to do with the fact that newsrooms, television newsrooms, are dying a slow death of attrition. I can tell you this, having been in it, that there are cuts across the board at television newsrooms and network newsrooms around the world. It's a common thing. A science reporter, a dedicated science reporter, is a rarity now, whereas before it was fairly common, especially for the big networks and the big newspapers, to have a dedicated science reporter. Now, not so much. Budget cuts, they say that science isn't so important. They can get by with using the press release. And a recent study by the London School of Economics and Political Science in June said that up to 75% of what has been reported in the BBC for science stories was sourced directly from press releases, almost completely verbatim. So there's no challenge going on. The reporter's not asking any questions. They're just simply taking this press release, putting it out, maybe changing a few words, changing a headline, and boom, there you go. And a lot of that is because of deadlines. They're all overworked, they're all overburdened, so they don't get a chance to really do any investigative journalism. And that's why blogs are so important. We do the investigative journalism that is not happening at the higher levels. So few members of the public, when they see these things, have the ability to even think beyond the headlines. I mean, you know, science training by its nature is a small portion of the population. And so a lot of the folks that read these things, they see something like the polar bears are threatened, or all the ice in the Arctic is going to melt by, well, let's see, is it this summer or next summer or the summer after that? It's one of those summers, the ice is going to melt in the Arctic. We're sure of it. And we see these headlines all the time. So the public doesn't have the wherewithal to challenge these things, and so for them it becomes almost an accepted fact. Yesterday, I was in line somewhere, and one of the persons in line noticed my badge and it said climate conference. And this fellow came up to me and says, "Oh, I see you've got this climate conference going on. Can you tell me, are we doomed? Are we past the point of no return, or is there some salvation?" This was an honest question from someone who thought that I was on the other side of the climate arena. And I said to him, well, there's all kinds of claims that are out there, but the reality is that the models that have been used to give you the stories that saying we're headed off to hell in a handbasket and other things just aren't adding up, and there's been this long pause. And we actually, in some cases, with certain data sets, haven't seen temperature change in the last 17 years. And he was shocked. He was absolutely shocked. What do you mean the models and things don't line up? I mean, I see this all the time on the news. And the temperature's been going up, up, and up, right? No. And I pulled out my phone, and I showed him a graph. And he goes, "I've never seen that." Well, of course, it's not being reported in the news, and that's part of the problem. That's the challenge that we face. And so that's why it's important for all of us, when we see these press releases, to go look for those disconnects and act on them when we can. Here's an example. Whoops, I think I skipped one. Okay. There we go. All right, some of the things to look for in press releases that are dead giveaways. Oftentimes I see press releases where they don't even put the name of the paper in, and so you have to go digging for it. There's got no citation of what journal it's even published in, and no URL to the published paper, and no DOI. When I see these kinds of press releases coming out, we end up with a situation where you have to go dig it out, and I spend a lot of time doing that. There's often a catchy headline involving animals, there's worst ever, or irreversible, or unprecedented. These are terms that are often used to catch attention and catch headlines. And so when you see press releases with these things in it, you might want to think about questioning them and digging a little deeper. And in some cases, we've got press releases that go out where there's not even any science at all. It's just an opinion from a non-governmental organization. And so those are the ones that need to be questioned the most. Okay, here's an example. This is just from last week or the week before. Our inability to deal with climate change is going to kill the penguins. This is from Mother Jones, who took a press release and turned it into this headline. And that headline got repeated and got repeated and got repeated. Lots of people took it up and go, well, gee, it's not just the polar bears, it's the penguins now. Well, as you all know, if you follow my blog, Antarctica just recently set a new record for sea ice, the highest ever. And so how are the penguins in danger? Well, not so much. This study, this scientific study, actually looked like this. There we go. This is what the press release looked like on the university website. New research using satellite images says that emperor penguins are more willing to relocate than previously thought. Well, that's a long way from the penguins are all going to die from climate change. What are you talking about? This particular study was done on something called the doo-doo penguins, D-U-D-U, down in Antarctica. And the study was done by tracking poop stains on ice from satellite. They're looking at these big smears as the penguins migrate. They're looking at these poop stains. So, that's the science involved. The word climate didn't even appear in a press release, but there was the one word that triggered it, temperature. And there was this phrase. That means we need to revisit how to interpret population changes and the causes of those changes. Now, no one said climate change caused it, no one said temperature caused it, but they did talk about temperature. And when we dug deeper on our blog and found out what was really going on, we found the temperature record for the area that these penguins are settled in. Here's what they were presenting in the paper. That line of temperature, zoom, straight to the moon. No science involved there. That's just the line saying temperature's going up. We know temperature's going up, right? And the population of penguins is going down. Ergo, science. Not at all. When you look at the actual temperatures from the weather station there, it's flat as a board. So where is the threat? One of my contributors wrote to the people that was involved in this paper, showed them this graph. They had no clue. The actual researcher had no clue about this. And so the researcher on our communications retracted his claim, but refused to change the actual press release. It's just very disappointing. So how do you go about correcting bad science press releases? Always talk to the PR agent and let them know that there's something wrong. Why didn't you include these things like the DOI or the paper or whatever? I do this on a daily basis. And when you folks see it, ask them too, because it'll help bring about a change. Contact the researcher and ask him, does this claim really hold up? Is that what you really were talking about? Because sometimes the researcher doesn't actually read what's going on with the press release, and they don't know what their words are being represented as sometimes. Write a letter to the dean if you have to, if you can't get any action on any of this stuff. And if a correction's been issued by a PR agent, send it to the media, because I have found when I've gotten a correction out of a PR agent, it sits there on their website. It never goes back out to Eureka Alert. It never goes back out to the media. You have to kind of push them to get that done. And so reporters often won't make changes unless they see it coming from the source. So you have to push it from the source and get a change done. And then publish a rebuttal if you got the option. Spread the word. Social media is the best way to put pressure on bad science. And of course, always speak truth to power. Thank you.